So you're going to advance the... All right, I'm Rosemary Woodard, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about SLTs and talk to you about how to organize what you're doing to meet the intent, I think, of the law and the school overall performance for creating SLTs. And if you'll advance the slide, we'll kind of get started. Now, this too may change, and I always start out with that when we're working with state level policy, when we're working with local policy, and we're working with board policies and up and down the line. Everything is subject to change, and that's one thing as an educator we know that change happens all too frequently, and sometimes we have to jump in there and implement things without having all of the background and the knowledge that we need. But in dealing with SLTs and working with teachers for the last few years about student learning targets, the very first thing that I realize is, hey, first we have to link compliance with law with common sense. And sometimes we take the common sense out of the dialogue, but in reality we do have to comply with the state laws. We have to comply with local policy. We have to comply with a number of concerns with accountability and other things, and to get there, a lot of times we need to look at common sense. And experience is critical when you're working through this process. And I get more calls and concerns about this process with first-year teachers and other teachers that are fairly new to the process, but it's new to all of us because it's only 2 years old where we've been addressing student learning targets. So because it is new, what we'll talk about is, okay, what can we do to make sure that what we're doing is in compliance with state law and local policy. And all of us that have always thought for a long time, we've got to start with the end in mind. What do we expect the students to be able to do? What do we want them to learn? And that's a big thing. The overall goal, the overall objective is to increase student performance. We know that. We want all of our kids scoring at least basic or above. And to say that that's the one goal, the one objective, that's really all that we need to look at. We want to move the kids to basic or above. We want to have the kids to have an opportunity to learn to get to that level. And I've always said, I've had lots of parents talking to me about high stakes testing, and they would say, well, what about No Child Left Behind? You're leaving my child behind with the test. And in many instances, kids may not be able to perform at that level on the state test, but it's not because they don't have a good teacher in front of them. And I keep saying that you put a good teacher with the kids, they're going to move. They're going to move. Now, are they going to be able to always pass that state test? It depends on where they came from. But our goal is for 100% pass rate. And so we want to make sure, is it aligned to Common Core? Is it aligned to testing? We certainly don't want a child not performing because we haven't done our job to research and see what is being tested and what the format, and expose them to the format of testing. And the other piece is, how do you know they're learning? Are you taking regular snapshots of where they are? Are you taking their pulse to see if they're moving forward? And a lot of making sure that the kids are moving where they need to be is that formative assessment throughout the year to make sure that they're moving forward or closer to that mark. Because if I take kids from the lowest percentile and I move them closer towards average, and I move them with the instruction and the supports at the school through RTI and other things, that we move them as a group, because it's not just my job, it's the whole group. It's everybody working together as a professional learning community. As we move them towards that goal, then we've got to be able to document that they're going there. Your formative assessment is part of that. What you're doing in the classroom, and this year, in an effort to help teachers, Caddo Parish has implemented benchmark testing and performance series testing, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we go forward, but that's part of that, how do we know that they're learning? And that's that formative assessment piece. So defining your central purpose, defining what you want to do. Are the objectives aligned to state and national goals? What are the thinking skills associated with your content? You know, and working with art, music, PE teachers, they say, well, how are we going to craft an SLT? What are we going to use as a measure? It's not a high stakes test. It's not, you know, I'm not going to be able to measure their musical ability on a LEAP test or an iLEAP test. And what I think, and this is just my opinion, I think that the enrichment, the art, the music, the PE, working in the libraries, those kinds of things, their application of the practical skills, the math, the science, the social studies, it truly is applying those other skills. And when you start thinking about Common Core and developing literacy and developing the ability to communicate in writing and verbally, the art and music becomes much more critical. And I am not an artist. I cannot sing. And I tell people that all the time. My babies used to cover my mouth when I used to sing lullabies to them, and now my grandchildren are doing the same thing. They, you know, so, but I do know that in theory, when I listen to two pieces of music, and then I can say, well, I really like that because I like the way it did this, that, the other. And I'm going to go bum, 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 and bang, 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 or I don't know anything about music, but I can tell you why I liked it. But if you're teaching me, and you're teaching me the theory that this is, and I can't even think of the terminology, this is an Allegra piece versus something else, and you've taught the students the vocabulary, the terminology. If I'm looking at a Picasso and a Monet, and I'm in art class, I can articulate, well, it looks to me like the Picasso's all blocks and lines, and then the Monet's kind of blurry. Well, that's a beginning appreciation of art. But after being taught and after learning about line and form and color, and then you start talking about the Impressionist and other things, you see that's practical application of mathematical skills and literacy skills. And so you cannot separate the art and music and PE because they are the practical application of the tested skills. And so I always say, all of us working together, that truly is a professional learning community. And as an art teacher, you may not want to grade an essay about the comparison of Monet and Picasso. But as you plan with your English teachers or your reading teachers, and you look at the rubric that's being tested on Common Core, that becomes the STEM. And I'm not going to be able to tell you whether what they said in comparing those two are valid artistic reasons for saying what they are. You could actually grade that part of it, and I could make sure that their literacy, how literate they were as the English teacher, and grade that composition. And then we've truly created a professional learning community where we're teaching them how to express things and cite details in something that they're really interested in, which happens to be art and music. And there's not a boy alive that plays basketball that can't tell you his percentage of free throws. But if I give him a test and I ask him what percentage is this of, you know, and I'm shopping for a dress, they're not going to be able to tell me. But they will be able to tell their percentage of free throws in a minute. So that's how we can really measure success. When, as a group, we plan together at the school, we look at what we need for a school goal, and then back it down to an individual classroom goal. So our target, who? Do you want all students? Do you want a specific subgroup? Who is your target group? And that is always, with your evaluator, you select a sample or a subsample. And you have to be very careful when you're selecting a sample or a subsample. Last year we had some people saying 30% of the 50% that are available 80% of the time. Well, by the time you figured that out, you couldn't figure out your own SLT, and most mathematicians couldn't. So when you're working with your group of students, you have to look at them, where they are, where they started, and try to make a reasonable sampling or a specific subset of the sampling so that you can move them forward. But it's always with your evaluator, because when we're talking about SLTs, we have a district goal of performance. You know, improving student performance on the tests, improving student performance overall, and making sure that our students are employable. Then, when we work towards that ultimate goal, every single school is part of moving them to that ultimate employability ranking. Even from a pre-K program, we're moving them forward academically. So with your evaluation, if our school has 30% of our kids scoring at basic or above, and we want to move 50% of them or 60% of them, whatever your school goal is, what part of that subset can you help them with? And if I'm an art teacher, I'm probably going to say in developing the literacy strategies, or we had some teachers looking at and I can't even begin to talk about the objectives that an art teacher has to teach throughout the year and the number of children that they are seeing during the year. But I looked at some SLTs just recently, and it was a foreign language teacher. And out of the 130 students I see 2 times a week, I will move them pre and post testing from point A to point B. And 80% of them will do 70% mastery on the pre and post test. It was a simple way, but he's only seeing the students 2 times a week, and he has 130 students that he's seeing 2 times a week. But he is convinced that the 70% of his students will be at that mark, and it actually happened, I believe. I don't know for sure, but you know, those kinds of things, you have to sit down with your evaluator to select the sample and determine, is it representative of your population that you're actually teaching, and will it move you and them closer to the mark? And the assessment piece, for non-tested grades, you're looking at portfolio for writing projects, rubrics for performance, foreign language. Many times during the course of my teaching career at different colleges, I've always talked to the foreign language teachers and what is your goal? What is your objective? Well, I want them to be able to speak fluently in the language that I'm teaching. Develop a rubric for a certain type of going out to a restaurant. Everybody does that in foreign language class. Going out to a restaurant, ordering food, asking questions about the menu, and then negotiating what the final price is, and so on and so forth. So they come up with this big scenario of a project they want their kids to complete. They create a rubric that's associated with it, and then they mark because at the beginning of the year, I'm not going to be able to do anything on that rubric. I might be able to say hello in the foreign language. But by the end of the year, I certainly should be able to master that whole sequence of the project. And that's just one example. There are limitless number of examples that could work through there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a paper and pencil test. Common assessments work well in tested grades, and that's why we do benchmarking, and that's why we do universal screens. And when I say a common assessment, the performance series assessment that Caddo Parish is using here gives us a universal screen of where the kids are at this point in time, where they've moved from point A to point B to move them forward during the course of the year. And so as the performance series test, as a student takes a performance series test, the items get harder. As they start missing it, it gets easier, and then the students and the teachers have a true instructional level of where I am at the beginning of the year. If I give the test, that same test, mid-year, I can see growth of my students. And that's the tested grades, but it is a common assessment. Benchmarking does the same in ELA and math, and it will give you a formative range to see if you're moving to the mark. But if you're not a tested grade, the first thing you have to look at is what information can you gather with what? Because I believe you have to be able to quantify what you're doing to protect yourself. In this time of accountability, you can't say the kids like it or the kids are happy. You have to be able to quantify it. And part of that quantifying is deciding what's important and where they started to get to where they need to be. And again, that cannot happen in isolation. That should happen with grade level planning. That should happen with your principal and your evaluator. Because ultimately, the principal's job is to move the school forward. With your assistants, the principal's job is to move the school forward. Working with your staff as a professional learning community so that you all have that same vision, that same goal, makes it a little bit easier. If you have no valid measure, then maybe the goal is wrong. Perhaps you really haven't defined the skill. And many times that happens. We have a nebulous idea out here of what we would like to see, what we would like to do, but we really haven't defined the skill set. And that oftentimes happens in special education classes when you have kids that are more severely impaired, because you really do not know, but your IEP should drive that. And as a mother of a special ed student, I used to say all the time, I don't care if she gets A's or B's. You know, if we can take the behavior incidents from 20 a month down to 14 a month, down to 10, to me that's a good IEP objective. Or intellectually, if she is moving from getting 4 math items correct on a time test or a 5-minute time test, and at the end of the year she has improved that. But again, looking at the students, looking at the groups of students, and looking at the skill set that you really want to target, I think becomes critical. And again, that still has to be in conjunction with your principal and your evaluator, because ultimately they're the ones that's signing off on your SLT. And when you get too convoluted with those SLTs, like the 30% of the 60% of the 20% that are present 40% of the time, when you do that, you're responsible for figuring all those numbers. And if you figure them incorrectly and miss your SLT, and then subsequently find out that you figured them wrong, it's too late. You have to be able to keep up with the data too. So I always tell teachers, I tell principals, I tell everybody that listens to me, even if you don't like the numbers, you need to understand them. You need to understand where they're coming from, and you need to understand them so that you can make sure that you're moving everybody in the direction. And requisite skills to accomplish the goals. Sometimes when you can't define where you need to go, it's because you don't understand those requisite skills to accomplish the goals. And many times I've heard presentations from people throughout this day, and they're saying, you don't have to worry about X, Y, and Z because it's not on the test. You don't have to worry about teaching this. It's not on the test. Well, I'm here to tell you, if I can't add and subtract, I'll never get to algebra. So, depending on where your children are, depending on your tested population, depending on who you're working with, you may have to include that as part of your pre-assessment. We're finding that X number of students lack those requisite skills. And because there is a large population that lack those requisite skills, this may be a subgroup that I target as one of my SLTs, because it's critical that that group moves up to the basic level. And that's how we close those achievement gaps, when we look at the subgroups that don't have the requisite skills to get to that end result. Your evaluator. Everybody goes back and forth about SLTs and Compass, and ultimately whoever is assigned as your evaluator should assist in setting the goal. And if your evaluators like me and says to their supervisors, I trust you. I'm not going to sit right here and spoon feed you, but if you come up with something, then we can meet. Then we'll hammer out a goal that's desirable and that'll work. But again, you need to decide where you fit in that overall picture, because ultimately it's the principal's responsibility to move that school to where it needs to be. And so they've got to live with anything that comes down that continuum. And so I am a firm believer in professional learning communities. I believe that as a group, if we're all on board this train, or we're all on board this ship, that ship will sink if we don't work together. There's no person that can work independently and continue to succeed over and over and over again. So ask for assistance in the goal setting, and if your immediate evaluator is unable to do that or unwilling to do that, there's always a perceived leader that will work with you as well. And I believe that. I think there are a lot of people on the campus that can work with you to come up with a workable goal for the entire, but ultimately your evaluator's got to sign off of that goal. And the evaluator should assist in setting the expectation for growth and should agree on the rationale. And I've read a lot of rationale that did not make sense to me, but it was so new last year. And the process was so involved, we really did not understand where we're going with a lot of it. I think we're a little bit better this year. And the states that have continued with student learning targets, they've come out with additional guidance, and our state is moving in that direction. We're getting more guidance all the time. And then the other thing is, your evaluator may assist in modifying the SLT. Now, there's a big debate whether you can modify an SLT. At the end of the year, when you say, oh no, I did not make this target, is not a time to modify your SLT. You need to know where your kids are. And if there is a compelling, reasonable reason that you feel that SLT needs to be modified, you need to sit down with the evaluators, sit down with your principals, sit down and work that out. But there is a provision for modifying SLTs. But you cannot do it at the last minute. And the state is looking at the data. And when they say that 60% of the students in Caddo Parish are performing on grade level, they're looking at the tested students that are basic or above. That's my understanding. 60% of the kids are basic. That means 40% are not scoring at the basic level or above on all the standardized tests. So when you're looking at testing, again, our goal is that 100% of those kids. So there's a 40% group that we really want to focus and move up. I think some of that subsets should be looked at for The big four, the rationale. What are the critical learning objectives? The content standards align to the objectives, the plan for assessment, and the measures associated with that assessment. When you're writing an SLT, you really need to be able to define that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are so frustrated with this, is because we don't know exactly what the critical learning objective is that we should target, or we're not real sure. As a professional teacher, looking at the data of your students where they come to you, whether it being an art student who can't draw a straight line or a curvy line, or whether it be a math student that can't add 1 and 1, you really need to look at the critical learning objectives of that group of students that you're teaching today. And it's going to be different this year than what it was last year. And it's going to be different next year, because you get different groups of kids. And someone said something to me about pre and post testing and using pre and post tests. And if that's agreeable with your evaluator, that is fine. And there's some big discussion about use of Dibble's results on testing and those students. If you have kids coming to you that are below benchmark at the beginning of the year, and they're still below benchmark at the end of the year, are we making the adjustments to make sure that they are moving at the rate they need to move to be on grade level by the time they end the 3rd grade? But the test you give at the beginning of the year with Dibbles is very different than the test you give at the end of the year for Dibbles. And people say, well, they're 2 different tests. But they're 2 different tests that measure where you should be at that point in time for your age. And if I gave the test that I gave at the beginning of the year at the end of the year, guess what? That means that you have moved to a 5-year-old 1-month performance range. And you're 5 years, 9 months now. So you're 9 months behind everybody else. So you really do need to understand what the assessments are saying. And I guess if there's anything that I feel badly about, is that I can't go to every single school and every single teacher and say, this is what the data really means. This is really what you're looking at. And when I say that 5 years, 1 month at the beginning of the year using 1 test, and 5 years, 9 months later, you should have grown during the course of that year. But if I give you the same test at the end of the year that I gave at the beginning of the year, and we're using Dibbles, can we measure that? No, we should be at benchmark. We want the kids reading at their level. So there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, and I know you've heard conflicting information, and that's why I say, you get online, you study up what the assessment is really measuring. You study what the average student should be doing as a kindergarten student, as a pre-K student, as a 1st grade student, what they should be doing at the end of the year, at mid-year, and see where those goals and objectives are. And then make sure that you're measuring it and that you're getting where you intend to be. I think that's always been the big 4 with SLTs. And I don't think that's contrary to anything that you've heard. If you want to move me forward one more time. An SLT is a measurable goal for student achievement over a given period of time that reflects ambitious, because if I've got a kid that's scoring below level at the beginning of the year, I want them to move at a rate faster than everybody else so they are on level by the end of the year. And if that means doubling up reading time, if that means doubling up math time, if that's a child that does not have any understanding of music, I really believe if my choir teacher had just let me sing in choir, I might have been able to sing. But she said, Rosemary, you just be quiet over there. Okay. It may have, no, I'm just kidding. No, you either have it or you don't. It just happens to do. It's one of those things. The Lord gave me other gifts and I'm very happy with them. But again, ambitious, reasonable. And when the state looked at the data and they said that you've got 60% of your kids scoring on grade level, that's 40%, but you've got 80% of your teachers making their SLTs, why is there a disconnect? It should be 80 and 80. And that's a reasonable question if it was a one-to-one correspondence. That would be a reasonable question if it's a one-to-one correspondence. But there are other variables associated with this, and we're moving forward with that because we're not talking about state level expectations. Our expectation is 100% the kids move at basic or above. Strong SLTs set the goals that prepare the students for the college and career rigor. They articulate that ambitious but feasible. We keep going back to reasonable, feasible. It does have to be reasonable expectations for the students. And then you have to identify a high quality assessment to measure that. And you noticed I've said this about 3 times during that presentation about the high quality assessment. Go to the next slide. This is assessment. It says high quality assessment. And it was interesting. We were working, it's probably one of the classes that I taught at one of the colleges on creating assessments. And there was a 20-item test, I think. And these 3 items were on the test. And it's, what is the main way the Nile River helped the Egyptian civilization develop? And then you've got A, B, and C. And then somewhere else in the test, what is the main reason civilizations are along river? A, B, and C. They're all the same answer. It's because the soil's fertile and they could grow from agriculture. But that item was in the test 4 or 5 times. I cut 3 of them out and put them up there for you. Now that may be an important concept in social studies. But as someone who's looking at Common Core, as someone who is looking at moving out of the box to a little bit more rigorous level, why not create a constructed response that says, why do civilizations develop around rivers? And can you identify the major ones that began in this area, whichever area I'm talking about, or during this time period, because I think it's time period. Then you really, and I have a rubric that says the fertile soil, that so on, so on, so on, so on. Then I have a rubric. And I've not asked the same question 4 times at the lowest level of knowledge. I've asked them a question that pulls the knowledge from their head and gets them where they need to be. And when you look at assessments and when you look at them, you have to look at them with that kind of objective eye. Because you're going to find in a lot of the tests that you create yourselves, and even some of the vendor-made tests, that they're asking the same thing in 3 different ways, and none of them are at the highest levels of understanding for students. And you can modify these 3 or 5 or 6 and put a picture in there, and they can respond to it, and you've really accomplished something. Goals for teachers, college and career. They should always tie to your district and school-wide goals, and they should provide feedback for you throughout the year. I told this has been a long time ago, I was a first-year administrator, I'll never forget it. I told this first-year teacher, she was teaching her heart out, and she was the only one that was working. The kids were going crazy in the classroom. It's the first month of school, and she just teaching her heart out. And I was observing her and trying to give her some feedback, and she said, but I have all this stuff to teach. If nobody's learning, darling, in the classroom, and you can't manage class, you'll lose your job quicker for that than not teaching all this stuff. And I was just, young administrator, not very smart. I'd never say that to a new teacher today. She burst into tears, and then I didn't know what to do. But in reality, what I was trying to tell her is, you need the feedback. You need to structure. You need to back up and think about where you're going and how you want to get there. And if you have to slow down, take care of some discipline things, and then move forward, do that. But you have to pace yourself. And if you're not getting regular feedback throughout the course of the year on what you're doing with your students, and you come up May and you say, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to change this SLT, it's too late. So whatever you're doing, and that's why it has to be a community, working with everybody within your school community to make sure that it happens so that we can move where we need to be. And I believe that's it. Is it rigor? Everybody has a different idea about rigorous instruction. But that's something that you need to look at. Is it aligned to Common Core? Can you see the things that they're requiring in Common Core about being literate, about being to identify and supporting activities in context? In almost every class, our science, social studies, we can promote the literacy component of the Common Core. It has to be challenging, it has to be attainable, and your evidence is going to be your SLT. That assessment represents what you're shooting for every time. Do you have any questions of me? Huh?
We have a whole stack of them.
Can't we just ask her a question?
Yeah, you can ask me a question.
I know a very common one was, when exactly can an SLT be modified? Is there a point in the year that's best?
I don't know. I don't think there's any definitive answer on when it can be modified. And what we'll do is we'll take all these questions together, because I am by far not the expert on SLTs. I'm here because I like to tell teachers, if you want to really do something, learn about how to use the data. I want you to start using the data, because when you do, we have tremendous results on student outcomes. And the more that you can get your people that you work with to use the data, you're going to see your students growing, and you're not going to be working as hard as you have in the past, because you're making smart choices and moving them in the direction quicker. And here's
I have a question before you started. I was late and I didn't get your position or title.
I'm Rosemary Woodard. I'm the Director of Assessment and School Support. Originally, I was hired to do coordination of the high-stakes testing and other things, and I just work with pupil progression and any other duties assigned, just like y'all.
You said coordinate the what?
The high-stakes testing here in Caddo Parish. I work with curriculum and instruction, a little bit of everything that deals with academics, more or less.
Yeah, if you want your honest thing on Compass, where are we?
I don't know.
Just honestly, where are we as far as Compass is concerned? I mean, your opinion, if you don't mind.
I don't really have an opinion on where we're going with that right now. I really believe that if you're going to look at the SLT process, and that's a whole political thing and a whole, has nothing to do, what we do, and the best thing that we can do is look at the kids that are in front of us and work with them to move them forward. And I'm not here to comment on the teacher evaluation system or anything like that. I'm here to give you some information to work on writing your SLTs so that you can move the kids forward to where they need to be, to the best of your ability with the least amount of stress. And I guess that's really more than anything else. And I'm not a political person. I can't talk to you about Compass.
You think we're understanding it, how well are we understanding,
I
how it
I
works?
feel like I can jump in for
Yes.
As far as my name is Shannon Sullivan. I'm with the American Federation of Teachers, and I work with Red River United. Our position with Compass is it's a broken mechanism. I think it is well intentioned, but there's a lot of elements, as I'm sure everyone in the room here can attest to, that it's not functional. You know, the purpose is to reform public education, but it needs to be done so in a way that's not punitive. I think we have, the evaluation scheme, which, can be incredibly beneficial, but we don't want to have it be punitive. We need to make sure that it is fair and it's transparent, and we want to make sure that everyone knows their rights in that regard. And you also have, on the flip side, the high-stakes testing, where we have high-stakes testing for teachers, but not necessarily for students. And as Ms. Woodard said, there's several lawsuits that are working its way through the system. You can always tune into Red River United for further information there. But if it takes a legal avenue, we're going to pursue a legal avenue because we understand that you're all very much professionals, and that your expertise in your field needs to be expressed through Compass and to be expressed in a very fair and transparent manner. Right now, there's a lot of inconsistencies there, and we want to tackle those one by one.
So I'm trying to see, are we understanding, have we gotten to a level of understanding? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it's well intentioned. It's a system that I think, there needs to be, a uniform practice, the same thing with Common Core, but we want to make sure that no one's hurt in the process.
And to truly understand, the whole professional practice piece, get Charlotte Danielson's books and read them. They are the best resource that I've had to really understand what really needs to change in the classroom and what really needs to change to move the children where they need to be. I'm a firm believer of her book and what she said, and that gives you a whole complete picture of how to improve performance. And I just firmly believe that the professional practice pieces that she puts forth makes it easier for you to do your job. There's a lot of questions here about the timeline for the SLTs, and our network team meets with us on a regular basis from the State Department, and our network team is a wonderful resource to work with us, and they work with the data as well. Dr. Carrie Lassiter is our head of that, and I would like to take these questions to the network team and to the group at central office and let them go through there. Someone asked, are there examples of good SLTs and outside resources? There are other states use SLTs. There are a lot of states that you have used SLTs, and when you pull them down and you look at them, a lot of states and districts are dictating exactly what their teachers are doing and should be doing. And in Caddo Parish, at least, we've kind of backed off of saying you have to do this and you have to do that. But we are asking that you look at percentages of students versus 9 out of 10 students. Say 90% of the students will do thus and such. And we ask that you move in at least 10% increments. The state came out with a guidance 10 to 15% increments. So if my 3 is going to be 80% of the students, then my 4 is going to be 90% of the students. And that's one of the guidance that Caddo Parish came out with, but it's different from district to district and within the state. So we just wanted to look at the percent of students, and I do know that there are good examples, but when you look at the State Department website, when you're looking at the numbers of students, they really didn't follow their own guidance at the 10 to 15% on some of the examples. But those examples came from other states. And you certainly can look at them. I think New York had some good SLTs. At one time, Tennessee had some really good SLTs. I believe Chicago has done some of this. And so you can go online and look at examples of other states and see what they've done. But realize that Louisiana has modified the overall Compass system to make it work for Louisiana. So even if you find something in New York or Chicago, it may not meet the guidance that the state has put out. So again, it goes back to you and your evaluator making it work for here. A lot of questions about when they can be modified, and I'm going to be very honest with you, I do not know. I don't have a clue. But I will find out and we will put it up. I think you can begin modifying in January, but I'm not sure. I will look.
And Rosemary, we'll post your answers both on the Ustream and on Facebook.
There's a question, are SLT set for the whole class or a subgroup of the class? Again, that's between you and your evaluator, and does it align to the overall goal? And it may be both or either or. It's really individual to the class and to the school. Caddo Parish is putting out 9-week benchmarks tests in ELA and math and EOC tested grades. They're being designed on the Achievement Series platform, and they're designed to come out as a formative assessment that tests just the big ideas that should have been taught from the beginning of the year to the end of the first 9 weeks. It is in our discussion, and will probably happen, that it's up to the principal and the teachers whether or not they use these benchmark assessments as grades or not, and that communication probably should come out before the end of this week. That's my understanding.
But we will be using those testing.
There will be a test for grades 3 through 8 and some high school content. That is part of what we worked with the network team, so that you can have a formative assessment that is Common Core aligned, that you don't have to create yourself. It should help you with planning. Someone asked about, should I add an attendance elements for my SLTs and other uncontrollables? It gets very hard when you say that 60% of my students that are present 80% of the time will do X, Y, Z, because then you have to keep up with the kids that are there at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, and then you have to figure percentages, and it gets very hard for you to keep up with that. I would probably just run a roster of the kids that I'm teaching right now, and then whatever is left at the end of the year that meets that 70% goal. But again, that's between you and your evaluator. If you can keep up with that data, that's certainly, and they'll sign off on it, that's certainly within your ability to do that. But it makes it much more difficult to keep up with. And the state doesn't have a required pre-test, so I have to write a test. And depending on your content, depending on what you're doing, you can find a number of different assessments that are available that could readily meet many of your needs. And I'm a firm believer of stealing from the NAEP website, because they have a lot of good test items there. That's NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. They have some very good test items there. There's a lot of released test items on the internet that you can use as well. Comment. I don't know about that one. I don't know. Someone says, I'm being told my entire grade level will have one SLT, but I don't teach every child. I don't know about that. Again, that goes between your evaluator and you, and those are some of those comments that we'll work with the personnel and the state network team. Should I add a behavior or referral element to my SLTs? Again, that's between you and your evaluator. If it's under your control and you think that you can modify things, again, that's a hard one to keep up with, because then you start tally marking behaviors and other things, and how do you quantify it? And you go back to what we talk about, what evidence, what kind of reports are you going to have to provide to make sure you've done this? So it could be very difficult. And someone's asking about getting rid of standardized testing, and that's a legislated fact. We don't have very much wiggle room on standardized testing, and we'll be here implementing policies that we may or may not agree with for the next however long we decide we're going to work in this career. There are a lot of policies, but standardized testing, I believe, is here, and I believe it's going to stay. And is it realistic to expect 100% at performance level? There are certainly kids that are challenged, special needs, and others, but to be honest with you, I want everybody to have the same opportunity that every other child has. And the only way they're going to have it is if I really believe they can get there. And if I fail, to get them there, I've done my best to get them to that mark. So
it must be realistic to provide the opportunity.
yes. And these are the same ones someone asked about defining rigor, and everybody defines rigor differently. Everyone defines rigor differently. And to me, it's a challenging, attainable opportunity for the students to demonstrate what they have learned and apply what they've learned. If you're not asking the kids to demonstrate what they have truly learned, apply what they have truly learned, if you're just keeping them in that rote area all the time, then there's not rigor. I can tell you what rigor isn't. It's where they're just drill and practice and memorizing and they're not applying that. And when you walk into a room that has rigorous instruction where the kids are engaged and they're asking questions and they're moving from responding to just memorized responses to where they're actually creating and applying, then you know rigor is evidenced. And again, that's all part of that Danielson model. And as you become, if you become proficient at it, you find that the kids take over your job. And they will move you where you need to be, and then you're not the hardest person working in the room. I've always told teachers, if you're working harder than anybody else in the classroom and you're dragging out at the end of the day, you're not requiring enough of your kids because they should be the ones that are crawling out at the end of the day tired because you have forced them into that level of rigor where they're moving the class discussion to where it needs to be. And the last one is performance series assessments so that the student can practice on the format. Sample performance series assessments. The performance series assessment, I mentioned that earlier, and you're asking about, the performance series assessment is an online assessment that as the kids get the items correct, it gets harder. And it keeps getting harder until they start missing items, and then it gets easier. So the really bright kids tend to take a lot longer because you'll get at your level of proficiency, your average proficiency, and then it'll shut down and say, okay, you're strictly 8th grade beginning of the year, and this is your growth trajectory. And they're all multiple choice items, and some of them are rigorous and some of them are not, but the achievement series item bank that teachers can access looks just like the performance series assessment. So if the teachers have a user ID and a sign in and you go in and look at achievement series, you're going to see the same type of items that they're getting on the performance series. And it's not something that they can practice for because as they get the items right, the performance series test gets harder. And if I'm just being a knothead and I'm guessing all A's, it'll shut the test down and spoil it. And that's the time as a teacher, if I was proctoring and I missed it and didn't stop, it'll spoil my test. And then that's when you bring the kid in during one of their favorite classes and make them do it, seriously.
Yeah, first of all, excuse me, everybody, my voice says I have a cold. And I know you know that I'm never short of words. So this is maybe one of those days. Thank you, Rosemary. I hope this is the beginning of a wonderful relationship.
Always.
Maybe a continuation of a wonderful relationship. For me, the SLTs are kind of like your PGPs. They're yours. And I think it's very personal what you do with your SLT. And it has to be something that can be attainable. Yeah, it does need to have rigor, but rigor does not mean impossible. So never set yourself up for failure because please know in the final analysis, the SLT will be used as part of your part of your evaluation. Now you say, well, I'm a VAM, so it does it. Well, it could. It still could. If we go in and there's a reason that your VAM needs to be challenged, they would go back and look at your SLTs. So SLTs never take those for granted. That they are really a part of your professional repertoire, and make sure that again that it's yours. You have to agree with your principal on. It can't be their way. It can't be your way. It has to be both of your ways, and it has to be something that you feel that is attainable, that won't be harmful to you down the road when you start looking at your evaluations. We're here as an organization to help you anytime, any way. All you ever have to do is to call us, and we will be more than happy to guide you. As I said, and facetiously, the Rosemary, I hope this is the beginning of a wonderful relationship. I've known Rosemary for a long time. That's why we wanted her to come and do this, and we are hopeful that we'll bring her back and continue to bring these to people that are home. Hello, you always in your pajamas or wherever you are, and that we'll continue to do this for you as just part of our role, is making sure that we provide as our part of reclaiming the promise of public education, making sure that the teachers in the classroom have all the tools that they need in order to be successful.
And we have a list of questions, and what we'll do is we will answer them and send them back so you can post them, okay?
I said it again.
Rosemary's right off camera. She was saying that we do have a list and we haven't been able to get to all of the questions today. She's going to research them. We're going to post the answers to those questions on our Ustream and our Facebook channels. If you have additional questions, feel free to type them in. Or if you do want to do a question anonymously, you can send me an email at ssullivan@aft.org. That's SSULLIVAN @aft.org, and we'll be happy to send that information on to Rosemary so we can address all of the concerns and questions you might have.
Thank you very, very much for being here tonight.
Right.
You that are not in your pajamas.
Yeah, everyone in the crowd and everyone in their pajamas.
And y'all, I have some data here. Do you have a dot cam number?